Hello, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. I'm Dennis Day with your Edge Group team host, and my co-host, Judy Gratton, is going to introduce our guest. Go ahead, Judy.
I'm extremely excited to have this special guest on today because this is my daughter, Caitlin Cooke. Caitlin is joining us today from Davidson, North Carolina, where she just moved with her family. Katie, I call her Katie, but other people call her Caitlin. Katie, could you just tell us briefly a little bit about you?
Sure. And thank you both for having me. I'm really excited to finally be here. I am an attorney. I graduated from law school in 2012 and have been practicing law since then, up until very recently. I was a federal prosecutor who specialized in financial crimes targeting the elderly. I was also an elder justice coordinator for the office I worked in. So I really learned a lot, both through ongoing education and practical experience on financial crimes targeting the elderly.
And that is why we have you here today, because I would really like for you to give us a little bit of insight about seniors and fraud. To start it off, are seniors more susceptible to online and other scams than other people, do you think?
Yes, for a few reasons, not just because they're seniors. We are experiencing what a colleague of mine at the AARP describes as the silver wave. The baby boomer generation is in elder years. And so there's just proportionately more people in that to target. And because they have lived longer and often amass more resources, they are a very lucrative group to target. That being said, they are in certain ways more susceptible to being victimized by scammers. And the reason being is that studies have shown you have changes in the brain that can increase susceptibility as any mild cognitive impairment that can affect decision-making ability to a significant degree. That's the factor. But even absent any sort of cognitive decline or impairment, studies have shown that there are age-related changes in specific regions of the brain that can impact decision-making, including predicting values and prospection. All these changes manifest as a diminished gut instinct, diminished gut response, views of untrustworthiness. And so the gist of that, according to neuroscience scientists who work with the Department of Justice, is that we become more trusting over time and less able to detect and guard against scams, even without any cognitive impairments such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson, or dementia. So cognitive decline, an older adult is more susceptible to a scam than they would have been 10 years prior to the same scam.
Wow. What are some examples of the scams that are out there right now?
I was brushing up on that a minute ago because it is ever evolving. I remember when the pandemic hit, trying how are these common scams tailored to this and try to think the way that criminals would think. There are some key categories to look for. One of the most common, especially for older adults, is government imposter scams. Those come in essentially two types. The first are benefit scams. So people calling and pretending to be the Social Security Administration or Medicare. They're asking you to provide personal information, gives them then access to your benefits. Some people use those to bill for medical devices or services that you never actually receive. And then the other common government imposter scam is someone calling to pretend to be a federal law enforcement officer, such as the FBI, the DEA, Homeland Security, saying that your information has been somehow linked to and you have to make a deposit into a government account, or that they aren't for your arrest and you have to pay money in order not to be arrested. And of course, that is never the case in a legitimate federal investigation. It's the other kind of government imposter scam. There's also scam promising a lucrative financial gain. You have an unexpected inheritance, a lottery winning, sweepstakes. And the gist of those scams is that there's this promise of a big pot of money, but you're going to have to pay your insurance or some sort of payment upfront to get access to that money. And once you make that payment, there's always another and another. And of course, the promised prize never comes. You can have mystery shopper or digital scams. And those are tricky because there are a lot of people today who want to hire digital assistants and people who work remotely. The hallmarks of those are your duties will relate almost entirely to opening and closing financial accounts or receiving and resending packages. And that is typically a way that scammers get victims to help them gain access to the proceeds of some other scam. So the scammer is scamming someone over here, and they need that person send the money to someone in the United States because they're probably not going to send it to India or Africa or overseas. And so they will hire a digital assistant or tell someone they're getting paid to be a mystery shopper and going to the bank to test the bank services. In reality, what they're doing is receiving proceeds, getting paid a very small amount, and then sending them on to either another money mule in the United States or overseas. Then we have tech support scams.
Laundering money. If you get caught in the middle of that, you are breaking the law.
It is a common practice in the federal system for agents in those cases when they've identified someone they think may not know that they're facilitating fraud to go and knock on the door and serve them a letter. Once you receive a warning letter and you're told the money you're receiving is fraud proceeds, if you continue, then most certainly committing a crime. After the mystery shopper sort of digital assistant, there's tech support scams. You could get a referral up your computer saying it's been exposed to a virus, and they either ask you to pay for a service that you never receive, hundreds of dollars for antivirus protection, or they will ask to access your computer. The key there is the first thing they'll tell you is to do a run command, run some sort of program that allows them to access the computer remotely and install software. They can steal information from the computer, and an unsolicited offer of help with your computer should be taken very skeptically. There's a lot out there. The most important thing when talking and thinking about these scams is when you know what to look for, you're likely to fall prey to them. And so if you apply to be a digital assistant and someone says, I need you to go open accounts at 8 different banks to receive money and test out their money transfers, you've heard this podcast or some other discussion, that's probably not legitimate. The biggest hope with the department's Elder Justice Initiative that I was a part of as a federal prosecutor is through education, we can help people avoid becoming victims in the first place. Remedies available once you are victimized and out thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars are quite limited to get the money back if there is any money remaining. The last categories of scams are what I would call affinity scam and then home repair scams. This is not an exhaustive list.
I said it's the highlights.
So affinity scams include romance scams. You go online to meet somebody, you connect with someone, and all of your communications are by phone or text. There's always a reason they can't meet in person, and then all of a sudden they have a pressing financial need. Once you send them money, they continue to have needs and things that they need you to send money for. Sometimes there's a promise that I have this money that once I get it, once I get access to it, I'll be back. But that's a very common scam and one that increased dramatically during the pandemic as we were all isolated alone and really craving that human connection. As I've dealt with these various scams, these are some of the most insidious to me because they play on people's fundamental desire to have relationships and community. And they are some of the hardest to convince people that they are being, because there's the full loss of the money and also the relationship they thought they had developed with someone. So those are, I think, particularly heartbreaking. And then you can have some sort of relative in distress scam where you get a phone call out of the blue where grandchild or a niece or a nephew is overseas and in trouble and send money quick, don't tell mom. Those are other common scams. And then home repair. I had a case like this where someone showed up unsolicited at elderly individuals' homes, telling them that their roofs needed extensive repair. And the victims weren't able to verify that on a second story roof. And this person continued to come back, and it was always one more thing. It was always one more repair. People showing up unsolicited to provide services that you didn't ask for, of course, to watch out for.
Okay, who's doing these? Who's the background on all those scams? Do we have any
So
idea?
a lot of the people on the phone, on the computer are overseas. People can feel embarrassed when they realize they've been scammed. Something to keep in mind is that these people are professional scammers. They do this as a full-time job. I've had cases where a romance fraud was perpetrated by a U.S. citizen who was down on his luck. But by and large, these bigger, more sophisticated scams are originating overseas, but they will often involve people in the United States who are receiving money and potentially more involved than that as well.
I know people that I personally have received emails from men who seem to be incredibly charming. And you're going, why are you contacting me? And it's a while for them to go away. I know of other people who have been contacted. It seems in one instance, it was always the same story with just a different face and name on it. Someone with a wonderful background, a widower, and an incredible job that took him overseas where he was injured and needed money. So it's like, no, he never got anything. It's frustrating to see that. I know my brother was approached by a woman online. He contacted you about that because he
And
had the bank account number.
yeah, and these scammers are trying to get as much contact with people as possible. I get friend requests from obvious scammers all the time on my social medias, and I am not elderly yet, but they're just in the same way that we get robocalls and I'll answer my phone and someone will be speaking in Chinese. That's likely a scam. It's just not one that I'm likely to fall for because I can't understand it. But someone who speaks Chinese and gets that phone call may react to it, whereas I just hang up. Scammers are indiscriminate in their efforts, and once they get someone who responds and remains engaged, they double down on that person. And there are scam operations. Multiple scammers will be in charge of maintaining continuous streams of communication with one person because they're sending money, and it's lucrative.
To be the same person is communicating.
Yes.
What did they find? Like the one that I remember, I was on Facebook, and there I don't even, if it's a man that I don't know, I'm not going to be friends with them. It's not going to happen. I just decline. But so when that first time it happened, I didn't know who it was, and who is this? How do I know you? Then it became weird.
Social media is a very common way that these individuals make contact. You might get an unsolicited email. Less common now, but it does still happen. They may send out something in the mail saying, call this number, you've won, or any way that you can be contacted.
I remember years ago, it was, my name is so, and I'm in a country and I need to send you $1 million to hold on to for. It's incredibly frightening because you think you're on your guard and they just keep changing the game up here. I was not aware of them. I haven't been approached to be any kind of a shopper. I do vaguely remember getting texts saying, would you like a digital something job? And no, I don't.
They may be posting on job boards like Indeed.com or LinkedIn, and you might respond to what you think is a legitimate advertisement, and you're providing all of your information to those people, and they may get you to open bank accounts or receive packages. Another common example, just what you said, text messages, like how many texts have you gotten saying your UPS, FedEx, Postal Service package has been delayed, click here to schedule to pick up, and You're not expecting a
Account has-
package.
Your account has been frozen. It's scary because it comes at you constantly. I freak out that I'm going to hit the wrong button accidentally. Is becoming more of an issue.
If you get an unsolicited text message or email that seems legitimate and you want to check, the best thing you can do is go and get the contact information for the post office, UPS, your bank, from the statement or online from their main website, and call and ask the company. Because if you click on the link or call the phone number, email, or the text message, you're going to get the scammers. But if you take a step back and go directly to the source you think you're dealing with, you'll be able to determine very quickly the communication is not legitimate.
Are men or women more susceptible to scams? Dennis, have you?
Have I not been approached? Social media is rampant with. I get the same friend request from a Asian woman in skimpy tennis outfits. Seems like the same person over and over again.
What I can tell you is that the FBI in 2022, which is the year we have the most recent statistics for, victims, and they define elder as anyone over the age of 60. And that's a statutory definition where they draw the line at the federal level. 1,000 victims in 2022 who lost over 8,000 victims lost $3.1 billion. And that was an 84% in the losses experienced by that same population group in 2021. The average dollar loss per victim was $35,000. More than 5,000 victims lost over $100,000. Really is anyone can fall prey to these things because they're not designed. It's not a romance scam just for lonely women. Be tailored, and you may be a woman contacted by someone with a dashing Facebook profile, but that person may be the same individual with the exotic woman contacting Dennis.
So you can't go after these people because they're not in this country. Our government, how do we stop this?
There are ways to get individuals from overseas. It has been done, and there are certainly challenges to those cases. The most important thing, whether someone is prosecuted at the state level or is part of a larger federal case, is we can't prosecute what we don't know about. And so getting these crimes reported, getting the evidence, their communications with these individuals, the information they were given, any notes they kept, verifying the losses they've suffered, and tracking and responding to live complaints is absolutely essential. In my experience prosecuting these cases, you think, how am I going to get the guy on the phone? How am I going to get the guy at the keyboard in a country overseas? You're never going to start there, almost never, in my experience. The way you find that person is you follow the money to them. You start with the people who are receiving money locally. Get the information they have, either because they give it to you voluntarily or they're prosecuted and they to cooperate. And then you work through the most readily available people until you find the common connection. I have personally done that in cases. Someone being overseas committing these crimes is not a barrier. There has to be a way to connect or track. Someone dealing with someone with a scammer in real time and can provide that information and allow a federal agency or a state law enforcement to assume their role in the conversation and get money, that's going to be productive and generate more evidence on which a prosecution could be built. Don't think that just because people are overseas, it's not worth reporting or that nothing can be done.
Is this an underreported crime?
Absolutely. It is very underreported. There, I think, was something like a book that maybe the reports we have represent, I don't even know. I think it was like 10%. It's hard to know exactly how many cases go unreported, but we know that many of them do, unfortunately. You have victims who feel they're in denial that they've been scammed. They may have loyalty to their scammers, depending on the type of fraud that they have experienced. They may be ashamed. They may be embarrassed. If They may have a fear of retaliation, particularly if in some of these instances, we've been talking more about the broader overseas scams. You can have elder financial abuse by a loved one. And so there may be fear of retaliation of a relationship. Many people will blame themselves and they just may not know what to do. And that can be really overwhelming and debilitating.
I don't think that enough is being done to broadcast avenues or where to go. We had talked about, hopefully you could provide us with some links of good places to go.
Absolutely.
Is there a place you can go? You named off a bunch of new scams, and I'm going to bet my next week there'll be more because that's what they do, is create new avenues. So is there somewhere to go where you can see this has just popped up on the radar and watch out for this? Because like you said, the digital thing I was not aware of. Really hard not to I don't answer phone numbers I don't recognize. I don't respond to texts normally. I still feel like I'm too trusting. And you're laughing at me. Thank you very much. But I can think of situations where I believed that people were legit, honest. Let's just put it that way.
And I don't ever want people to think that they can't be trusting. There's this kind of story about a man who pulls a snake out of the fire. The snake bites him. The snake falls back into a fire, so he gets a stick to try and get it out. And someone sees it and says, "Why would you help that snake? It bit you." And it's in the snake's nature to bite, but I'm not going to let that change my nature. And I think it's good to be informed. It's good to know what to look for. Also good to allow yourself to still believe in the fundamental goodness of humanity. Yeah.
Even though there are snakes.
I wanted to ask if something like companies that are creating these identity theft prevention, you pay a monthly subscription and they're supposed to protect you against that identity theft. Is this going to help against the scams? There are businesses out there that you subscribe or you pay a yearly monthly fee and they are supposed to protect you against identity theft. Is that going to work against any of these scams?
Probably not, because a lot of the scams we've been talking about are ones that are perpetrated through direct contact with the victim. And there are apps and things you can do that will block no, don't know, and that can help avoid those initial contacts. But as far as I'm aware, there isn't a similar way to prevent people from contacting you on social medias, or maybe an email goes into your spam folder, maybe it doesn't. One that I've been seeing pop up in my own email personally is just invitations by a random person to a Google document or a Google spreadsheet. And I don't know that person. I don't have any reason to be editing a document with them. I know it's spam. And I mark it as Google isn't going to filter that out as spam in the first instance because that's one of their own products. So I think when you're talking about LifeLock or something like that, those companies are monitoring the dark web for your information and they're alerting you to any uses of your credit. That in a scam like this, if you're giving out your information, it'll catch the use of it on the back end, but it won't on the front end.
I got contacted again that an organization that I belonged to had been hacked and my information may have been stolen. And my response anymore was, so what? I'd been hit so many times. It's out there and there's nothing. It irritates me when people ask me for my social security number. The doctors ask for it, employers ask for it. It's supposed to be the one thing you're not supposed to be handing out, and everybody seems to want it. And then they lose it for you. Thank you very much. But what about families? What should they be looking out for if they have a senior in their family that could be susceptible to this?
I think that's a great question. There are certain warning signs that you can look for. Changes in banking practices. If you don't have insight into that, uncharacteristic changes in their spending habits. Someone's using their ATM or credit cards that's not them. An unexplained disappearance of funds. Someone who had sufficient financial assets suddenly has an increase of debt despite those adequate financial resources. On the flip side of that, you could see someone unexpected influx of money, coupled with increased or unusual purchases or transactions. Have a lot of money coming in and a lot of money going out.
So would you
Uh,
recommend then that a family member because you can't see that if you're not connected to their accounts, can you? Recommend that power of attorneys be
I definitely wouldn't do a power of attorney because that carries its own risk with someone being allowed to conduct financial transactions on your behalf. There's certainly scenarios where those are warranted and needed, but I wouldn't say just giving out power of attorneys is a way to avoid these things. If you have access and you are aware of that, it's a sign to look out for. There are others, such as a sudden appearance of an uninvolved or unknown other. All of a sudden, someone you care about is talking about another person you've never heard of before. A person seems to be playing an outsized role in their life very quickly. Sudden or uncharacteristic to a person's social practices. Are they isolating more? And then, of course, there's always if they tell you that they have sent money to or given money to someone under circumstances that seem suspicious. That's always
I
something to look out for. But
these scammers will send money to not a lot of
they will.
some money to make it look like they're legit.
Yes. So that, like with talked about with the mystery shopper or the digital assistant, you'll get money and you'll get paid out of that money, and it could seem legitimate. And that's what I flagged what will you be asked to do with that? It's typically going to involve a bank or the postal service or some sort of international or interstate carrier or money transmitter service.
Mhm.
It's not going to the mall and testing out different stores. But they will give you some money, but they will inevitably demand much more. I did want to touch on a point that you mentioned about I wanted to touch on a point about statistics and the information you said about there not being a lot out there. Back in 2017, Congress actually recognized for data on elder abuse and passed the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act that enabled the U.S. Attorney's offices around the country to create, it enabled and commanded that they create elder justice coordinators, which was one of the positions that I held when I was with the department. And their role is to prosecute these crimes and to do community outreach to help educate the public. A lot of federal agencies keep scam alerts, like the Federal Trade has news bulletins you can look at and subscribe to get updates on the latest scam. The FBI, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, those are just three off the top of my head that I know keep these statistics and try to warn the public whenever there's a new scam. Attorneys' offices sometimes issue warnings. Those are less frequent, I would say, than some of those other sources, but I know our office did that a fair amount when I was there. But going to the Federal Trade Commission, the FBI, the Department of Justice has an Elder Justice Initiative, and so they actually have a public-facing website where they post a lot of information about these scams, and people can go and learn about them and report them. And then you also have entities like AARP, which are very active in this space. They have Fraud Watch. And when I was with the U.S. Attorney's Office, I actually did a teletown hall with AARP. It was a conversation very similar to this, but they offer those where people can come and ask questions and learn from various industry stakeholders like the U.S. Attorney's Office and others.
Wow. That's good to know. And you're going to send me links to that so we can post just to different. I was not aware that ARP was involved in that, but.
Yes. They're actually a great resource. They have facilitated groups for victims of fraud to connect with one another so that they can process and heal together and feel less alone in having been victimized by these.
I have just something that came up, Dennis, that I hadn't thought about so what about, first of all, disabled people?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure if they're online, they have, and that's scary. But also, what about teens? Are there scammers? I know that there are kids have been a result of connections with being online. But are there scamming? I'm very disappointed that our country does not have more regulations and oversight on social media to protect people from things like this.
It is a global problem. But yeah, everyone can be a target of a scam. Can think you're in an online relationships with someone and as a teenager send them photos or videos that you wouldn't want anyone else to see and then have those shared more broadly or be blackmailed and threatened that they will be shared more broadly unless you're able to send money, and a scam that targets that population set maybe a bit more frequently than older adults. But I think we talk a lot about online safety for children, which is an extremely important discussion. I think we do less of that for elder adults because we think that once you've reached a certain age, you ought to be able to protect yourself. And by and large, you can. It's just having the information and knowing what to look for.
If you have been a victim of a scam, are you more likely to be approached by another scammer?
Yes, I would. It is very common, especially in these broader international fraud rings. Scammers, like, they may share information with other scammers that, here's my list of people who are giving me money. That can happen. It is certainly the case that once you have fallen for one scam, you may be approached again.
And you
Where's the money going? Who's raking in the dough on all these scams?
So the money is going to the scammers, but there's cuts of it being taken every step of the way. As I said, if think you're in a relationship with someone, you are probably not going to send money to a call center in India. If you think that you're dealing with, a service member who is serving overseas in the Middle East. And so in order for the person who you're actually talking to get the money, they have to deal with various individuals along the way. And there's a variety of ways in which they do that. But every point at which the money moves, somebody is taking a cut. And then finally, the money goes back to either the individual who is perpetrating the scam, the group. In these call center cases, the call center owners are pocketing a lot of the scams. I was involved in a case that against a call center owner who profited over $10 million in the few years that we looked at him.
And you mentioned that getting that money back is not really going to happen, not very often.
There can be instances where you recover some money from these scams, but the number of victims, when you start trying to apportion it out to try and make everybody whole, no one, in my experience, gets all of their money back. And when the money goes overseas, it becomes very difficult to trace. It depends on the cooperation of the country that you're dealing with and how much information they can or will give you about where the money went or the assets that the person has. And so it is far better not to lose money than to try and get it back.
Well, is there anything we haven't covered, Katie, that you think would be important to let people know?
If you think that someone you care about has been victimized or you're trying to help someone, I think it's really important to know a few things about how the challenges that come with a victim of these frauds. The first thing is to seek to reduce shame and embarrassment. It's so important for people to know that it is not their fault. Again, as I said earlier, they're dealing with sophisticated actors who are trained to carry out these frauds and do it as a full-time job. And so really understanding that and communicating that to the person in the first instance is so important. And especially when you're dealing with really any of these frauds, but the affinity frauds, acknowledging the importance of loneliness and social isolation as contributing factors. We saw that a lot in the pandemic. And when people are alone and are unsure, they may be apt to trust people. And there's nothing wrong with that. I would also say, in my experience, the thing that was most helpful for people who needed to move on and empower them to help prevent the scammer from exploiting somebody else I've seen victims who have lost literally everything get a fire back because they felt like they had an important role in the prosecution or that they could do something to help somebody else. And that is really key to help them find a way. And then also to help them connect back into hope and connection, either with you, their community, the groups like AARP's victim discussion groups, and help them find a path forward, not just financially, but socially and more broadly. So I think that's something that it can be so easy when you hear about something happening to someone to have that judgment of, oh, that could never happen to me. And then either wittingly or unwittingly coming from that place toward the victim. And that's just, it's not helpful.
It's in that knee-jerk reaction if it's a family member or whatever, and they've lost thousands of dollars, that is going to run you or them to be angry. And that matters.
And it's not going to encourage them to give you more information about what happened. So meeting people where they're at is really important, establishing that trust and respect. And if the person is still being scammed, just engaging with them and reflecting back what you hear. So what you're telling me is he's in the military, but the military's not paying him. That seems weird. Don't you think? For it be like that would be reported on. You can ask questions to help people draw their own conclusions instead of telling them what you think they should know. If there is a relationship or something going on and you're aware of a financial aspect to it, you can express concern about that and suggest maybe that they pause sending money and gauge the response that they get back. You can offer to help them file a police report. And if they can't do that, you can say, give me the information and I'll file the report.
If you start at the local police station to begin with, will they be helpful?
Vary depending on who you get. But you can report to the local police. You can also report to the FBI. They have an internet crime complaint center, which is IC3. That really deals with crimes that begin or are perpetrated over the internet. The Federal Trade Commission has a consumer sentinel network where you can report any kind of fraud or consumer abuse. If you're specifically dealing with an older adult who meets that 60 years of age or older, the Department of Justice actually established a national elder fraud hotline that is open every day from 10 a.m. to p.m. Eastern Standard Time. They have people who speak English and Spanish and other languages. And when you call, you get a dedicated case manager who helps you navigate the reporting process and follows up with you. So it's not just like a black hole where you put that information in and then never hear back. And so the phone number is 1-833-FRAUD-11, which is 1-833-372-8311, which I'll give you, of course, for the show notes.
Thank you. I was not aware of that either. You've given us lots of information here that hopefully will help people avoid ending up in that situation. But if they have been in that situation, to understand that it is not a flaw in them and that these people are professionals at what they do. Sad, but true.
They are. And I think, go ahead.
Is there insurance?
I'm not aware of scam insurance.
Okay.
And I will say this, one thing that, is particularly heartbreaking when dealing with victims who have lost a lot of money. Some people will have pulled money out of their retirement before they were able to. There is no fraud victim exception to the taxes that are assessed on that money. And so victims can lose their retirement savings and then have to pay taxes on those losses. I've had many victims ask me, will the IRS, and in cases that I have worked with IRS agents, like, will the IRS waive the tax on this? And unfortunately, that's not a remedy available in the criminal justice system. And hopefully that will change one day, but that's just something else to be aware of before you start pulling money out.
So you were that as fraud victim tax what?
So anyone who pulls money out of a retirement account that was paid in pre-tax, there are tax penalties to taking that money early. You have to pay the taxes on it that you didn't pay, was put into the retirement account. And so if you are a fraud victim and you want to send to a fraudster because you believe they're legitimately doing something for you or have a legitimate need, and you pull that money out of that account thinking that you're going to get paid back, not only will you likely be out that money, but the next tax season, you're probably going to have to pay taxes on it.
Wow.
Might be a large bill.
Yes, it can be for some people, which, as I said, is that's an aspect of these crimes that I find particularly heartbreaking.
Maybe we need to reach out to our congressmen and senators, just out a bill.
And I will say there are a lot of resources out there. I think starting with your state attorney general can sometimes be really useful. I know when I lived in Virginia, the Virginia Attorney General's office actually offered something called an identity theft passport. So if someone had used your identity unlawfully and you'd filed a police report and could prove that, the Attorney General's office would give you paperwork that you could then use to, say, go to your credit bureaus and get your, accounts that you didn't open and charge off taken off your credit report and things like that. And so there are a lot of resources out there. It's just knowing where to look. I think everyone realized what a problem these scams have become and how much help people need when they become involved in them. And so everybody's trying to do something, but then when everybody's doing something, who do you go to?
But that 800 number sounds like a really good place to start.
Absolutely.
Because it can then lead you to different avenues that would be helpful. That's really, and I was really shocked to hear our had anything to do with that. That's really great to know too.
They have great resources. And yeah, that elder justice line, I think, is just such an invaluable resource because it's run by crime victim protection within the Department of Justice. And so it's people who are trained in working with crime victims and helping crime victims. And then they are going to be up to date on, reporting and what kind of scams are popular, and they will help victims navigate the reporting process. And having that dedicated case manager I've never seen anything like it in the federal level. I think it's wonderful. So
Is most of the scams and fraud here occurring digitally online?
I would say that is the vast majority are, because we increasingly are a digital society. But I mentioned the home repair scams because that, when you are thinking only that you need to guard against scams on the computer and someone shows up at your door, you may not pause to think, wait a minute, why are they here? Is this legitimate? And actually need the services that they're offering. And in those contexts, I always just recommend just get a second opinion. Have someone else come out and let you know if you need that work done. Get 2 quotes so that you can compare them. And then in all likelihood, you either don't work or it's not as extensive as what's been relayed to you, and you can avoid having to deal with the scammer at all. I was just going to say, in addition to gathering information and promoting reporting, at least on the federal level, there's been a lot done by the United States Sentencing Commission and Congress to try and increase the penalties for people who target older adults. And, that's something that people may not be aware of, but there's vulnerable victim sentence enhancements and abuse of position of trust and things like that can apply in a wide variety of cases, but are typically applicable in elder financial crimes. And there's also something called the Scams Act, which is Senior Citizens Against Marketing Scams Act of 1994. That was one that it can increase the penalties of a federal offense by 10 years if a crime victimized 10 or more persons over the age of 55 or targeted people over the age of 55 using some sort of telemarketing or email marketing scam. We're fighting the good fight, and there are tools available, but the most important tools are those that allow people to empower themselves and avoid becoming victims in the first place.
Wow.
Anything else, Judy?
I don't think so. I'm just so thrilled. I think I waited a long time for this. So I'm really
Yeah.
pleased that. I guess I did have one question, Katie, and that is are these crimes most often federal crimes then, not state crimes, because they originate somewhere out of the country or out of the state you're in or something like that?
They can be prosecuted depending on the fraud scam and what's at play. If you have someone who is purporting to do home repair or is like an in-home health aide who's using your credit cards, those are things that could be prosecuted locally quite easily. These broader frauds with individuals overseas, in my experience, those tend to work best in federal and state partnerships, but federal have to know about them. And we have those resources, but also your local law enforcement may be involved in federal task forces. Your bank may be able to help report. There's just a lot of ways to get that information out there.
Okay. Like I said, I'm just thrilled. Thank you so much for spending time in your busy day with us. And I think this is
Absolutely.
such valuable information for us to be able to pass on to our listeners.
Happy to do it. And I appreciate the opportunity and hope that people come away informed and able to protect themselves and those they love against these scammers. So thanks.
How about a shameless plug for your podcast? Talk about that briefly.
Sure. Yeah. So, as I said, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I left that position earlier this year. And one of the things that I've been doing with my time in the interim is a podcast with my mom, your co host, Judy Gratton. It is called Ascending Us. And in our first season, we were weekly. We need to get season 2 going. But every week we sit down and we discuss a spiritual topic openly and honestly with each other, the goal of promoting intergenerational healing. We both have done a lot of spiritual work individually over the last 20 years. And the goal of the podcast is really to learn and grow from each other because we believe that we will heal more completely together than we would apart, and really do focus on intergenerational healing and spiritual growth. And we would love for any of your listeners who find appealing to check it out.
Ascending Us.
Yep.
Any further questions about this topic or any other topic, reach out to us at www.edgegroupteam.com. Bye-bye.